Sometimes, the law forgets the difference between justice and paperwork, and sometimes, it takes one quiet man to remind the world what compassion really means. When a single-dad veteran working at a Texas prison discovers that two twin biker sisters on death row might be innocent, he faces a choice that could cost him everything: his job, his freedom, even his daughter. But their final request will reveal a truth no one was ready to face. A story of courage, redemption, and the power of doing what's right, even when the system says you're wrong. Stay with us until the end, because the last letter in this story will stay with you forever. Before we begin, if you believe kindness can change lives and that courage still matters, please take a moment to subscribe to Soul Moment Story. Every story here is a tribute to the quiet heroes who remind us doing good is never a mistake. Now, let's begin. The hum of fluorescent lights echoed down the tiled corridor of Travis County Correctional Facility, slicing through the early morning quiet. Somewhere in that sterile maze, a man in a worn green jacket pushed a cart filled with legal forms, envelopes, and black coffee. His name tag read, Michael Reed. To most of the guards, he was just the quiet one, the veteran who didn't talk much, but somehow got things done. To the inmates, he was something else entirely, the man who listened. Michael's boots made no sound against the linoleum floor. His movements were unhurried, steady, the kind of calm that made noise uncomfortable around him. His dark hair brushed his collar a little longer than regulation would have allowed in his old Delta Force days. The scars on his knuckles told stories that no one dared ask about. He stopped in front of cell block D, where a dozen women were just waking up. The clang of metal doors and the low murmur of voices filled the air. He greeted them with a nod. No words, just that small gesture of acknowledgement that said, "I see you." "Morning, Mr. Reed," one of the guards said, signing a clipboard. "Morning," Michael replied. His voice was gravelly, almost too soft for the concrete echo of the hall. He delivered paperwork to the prisoners' petitions, letters, a few handwritten appeals. For most of them, it was busy work, a distraction from the long crawl of time. But for Michael, every letter, every plea was a thread of hope. He reached the last cell, two women sitting cross-legged on the floor. They looked up in unison, mirror images of each other. Long black hair, sharp eyes, identical tattoos curling around their wrists. They were the Cooper twins, Harper and Hazel, notorious in Texas tabloids as the Iron Vixens. Michael had read their file. Convicted of first-degree murder. Sentenced death by lethal injection. The press painted them as monsters, wild, remorseless biker queens. But seeing them now in the dim morning light, Michael saw something else: fatigue. And something worse: acceptance. "Paperwork for your hearing review," Michael said, sliding two envelopes through the slot. Hazel smirked, her voice raspy from too many sleepless nights. "What's the point?" "They already decided what we are. Paperwork's not for them," Michael replied quietly. "It's for you. Sometimes the act of writing is the first step to forgiving yourself." That made Harper glance up. And what if we got nothing to forgive, Michael? Paused. The air between them grew heavy. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to go, but her words lingered like a shadow that followed him down the hall. In the small break room later that morning, Michael sat at a metal table sipping coffee that had long gone cold. He watched the rain streak down the narrow window. Texas storms rolled in fast this time of year, heavy with lightning and secrets. He pulled a small photo from his jacket pocket, a smiling girl with brown curls and bright eyes. Grace, his daughter, 10 years old and growing up too fast. She was the reason he'd taken this job. Steady hours, steady pay, no more deployments, no more sand or gunfire. He promised her stability. But sometimes, when the prison lights flickered late at night, He missed the desert silence, not the violence, but the clarity. In war, right and wrong were often simple. In this place, they blurred like ink and water. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Read. Warden wants to see you." Michael rose, straightening his jacket. The warden's office smelled of old books and stricter men. Warden Calloway looked up from a pile of reports. "Read. You've been assigned a new escort detail. 2 inmates scheduled for transfer to death row holding Harper and Hazel Cooper." Michael frowned slightly. The twins, Calloway, nodded. "Yes. They're requesting to speak with you personally before transfer. Said it's a matter of conscience." Michael hesitated. Inmates often asked for small favors: cigarettes, phone calls, last meals. But a matter of conscience was new. "I'll talk to them," he said finally. An hour later, he stood in front of their cell again. The rain outside had turned into a storm wind, howling through the ventilation shafts. The twins were sitting side by side now, whispering. When they saw him, both rose. "You wanted to see me," Michael said. Harper stepped forward, gripping the bars. "We heard you help prisoners file last requests." "I helped them file what's lawful," Michael corrected. Hazel smiled faintly. "Then you're gonna need a big form for this one." Michael crossed his arms. "Go on." Harper took a deep breath. "We don't want a special meal. We don't want to call nobody. We just want to go somewhere. Somewhere. There's a place out past Austin." Harper said, her voice softer now. "An old stretch of road used to be where our dad took us riding every Sunday. Before everything. We just want to go there. One last time." Michael blinked. The request was absurd, and yet something about it didn't sound like manipulation. There was a tremor in her tone, a truth too raw to fake. "That's not how the system works," he said. Hazel's gaze met his steady and defiant. "Yeah, the system doesn't work. That's why we're here." The words hit him harder than he expected. He'd spent years believing the system could be fixed, that justice, if followed properly, would always balance. But now, standing between these two women, he wasn't sure anymore. "I'll see what I can do," he said, at last. They both stared at him in disbelief. "You mean it," Harper whispered. "I didn't say yes," Michael replied. "I said I'd see." That night, the storm grew worse. Lightning slashed across the Texas sky, thunder rolling like artillery. Michael sat alone in his small office, typing the request form into the prison's digital system. Under purpose of request, he typed psychological reconciliation prior to execution. He knew the ethics board would reject it. They always did. But he filed it anyway. The next morning, the denial came swiftly. Request denied. Unsafe and non-essential. Michael stared at the screen for a long time. He should have expected it. He should have moved on. But he couldn't shake the image of Harper's eyes, eyes that weren't angry or scared, just tired, like someone waiting to wake from a nightmare that never ended. He leaned back, closing his eyes. His own nightmares were quieter now, but they still came the memory of a child, crying in Mosul, of smoke, of choices made under orders. Choices that blurred the line between duty and mercy. A faint knock at the door pulled him back. It was Officer Daniels, one of the younger guards. "Sir, the twins asked me to give you this." He handed Michael a folded scrap of paper. Inside, in shaky handwriting, were just 5 words. "Thank you for believing anyway." Michael stared at it, the ink smudged by what might have been a teardrop. Outside, the storm began to calm, but inside him, something else had started to stir, a quiet, restless unease. He folded the note and tucked it into his jacket pocket. For the first time in years, Michael Reed, the quiet veteran who followed every rule, felt the fragile tremor of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Doubt. And beneath that doubt, something even more dangerous. Hope. The morning after the storm, the air over Travis County Correctional Facility felt charged, like static, before a lightning strike. Clouds still hovered low over the compound, smothering the light, giving the place a sense of quiet tension. Michael Reed stood by the reinforced window in the control office, sipping bitter coffee, as his eyes followed the guards doing morning rounds. He hadn't slept. The denied last request lingered in his thoughts like smoke trapped in his lungs. The words on that crumpled note, "Thank you for believing anyway," kept playing in his head. In a place built on rules, it had been a long time since anyone thanked him for believing in anything. A sharp knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Officer Daniels again. "Reed, the twins requested to speak with you privately. Cell D14. They say it's important." Michael set his mug down. "Did they say what about Daniels?" Shrugged. "Just said it's not about escaping." Whatever that means. The door to cell D14 opened with a metallic groan. Inside, Harper and Hazel Cooper were already standing side by side, their expressions unreadable. Hazel spoke first. "We heard they denied the request." Michael nodded. "Less than 6 hours after I submitted it. Typical," Harper muttered. "They don't deny you. They just pretend you're not worth the ink." Michael leaned against the doorframe. "You said you had something important." The sisters exchanged glances. Then Harper stepped forward, eyes locked with his. "We want to make a new request, one not covered by your form." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Go on. It's the same destination," Hazel added. "Just different reasons now." Harper took a deep breath, as if every word was a confession. "Our last request is this. Take us there. Not for sightseeing, not for sentiment. Take us to where our father took us as kids, because there's something buried there. Something no one else knows about." Michael stared at her. "You're telling me you have evidence?" Hazel nodded. "Proof. But not for us. For our father." That changed everything. Back in his office, Michael sat alone reviewing their case again. This time, not as a former soldier or an employee, but as a man trying to understand justice in a system that rarely paused to question itself. The twins had been convicted 7 years ago in the death of their stepfather, Vincent Hale Sr., a man with a documented history of domestic violence. The official story claimed they had lured him into the garage, drugged him, and set the place ablaze. But no physical evidence ever tied them directly to the act. The conviction had relied heavily on their confessions that Michael now knew were too neat, too rehearsed. He remembered Harper's exact words from yesterday. "We just want to go somewhere." Now he understood it was never about nostalgia. It was about giving him just enough reason to listen. Later that afternoon, as rain began to fall again, Michael entered the warden's office. "Sir, I want to resubmit the Cooper twins' last request, this time on legal grounds." Warden Calloway didn't even look up. "Denied once. It'll be denied again." "You know the policy. I'm attaching a clause from Texas Penal Code, paragraph 40.28. 12 provisions for compassionate access under exceptional evidentiary concern. Section C states," Calloway finally looked up, narrowing his eyes. "You're serious?" Michael nodded. "I believe this request is not only ethical, it may prevent a miscarriage of justice." The warden folded his arms. "You're walking a very fine line, Reed. You're not a lawyer." "No," Michael agreed. "I'm not. But I swore an oath to uphold justice. That oath didn't expire with my uniform." The next morning, the rejection came again. But this time, something was different. Michael didn't crumple the memo. He placed it carefully on his desk, then turned off the lights and sat in the dark for a long time. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Another storm was coming. He walked to the far side of the prison where the backup power panels were located and unlocked the door with his master key. He stared at the switches, fingers hovering, and thought of his daughter's voice reading aloud the Pledge of Allegiance at school just last week. With liberty and justice for all. He flipped the main switch. By nightfall, power had gone out in D-Block. Lightning danced in the sky as the generators hiccuped, causing flickers across the prison's control network. Michael moved like a ghost through the darkened halls dressed in civilian clothes. He didn't carry a weapon, only his old Delta Force satchel. He reached cell D14 and unlocked the door. Harper and Hazel stood silently waiting. No screams, no panic, just silence and trust. "You're really doing this," Hazel whispered. Michael looked them both in the eye. "I'm not breaking you out. I'm giving you a chance, a very small one. If you run, if you lie to me, it's over." "We won't," Harper said, voice shaking. "We swear it." Under the roar of the storm, the prison van rolled out through the service exit. Michael knew the cameras were down only for a window of 20 minutes, enough if traffic stayed light and luck stayed loyal. The sisters sat quietly in the back hands, still cuffed, but no longer guarded by walls. The drive was nearly silent until Harper broke it. "Do you believe we did it?" Michael kept his eyes on the road. "Does it matter what I believe?" Hazel leaned forward. "It matters to us." Michael didn't answer immediately. "Then finally, I believe something about your case feels wrong. I believe no one should die until every stone is unturned. And I believe your stepfather may have been the kind of man the system failed to stop." Silence again. Then Harper reached into her jumpsuit's inner pocket and pulled out a small, rusted key. "Dad gave this to me when I was 13. Said it was for someday if things go wrong." Michael glanced at it at the next red light. His breath caught. Carved into the metal was a faded insignia, a triangle with a falcon in the center. "Delta Force," Michael whispered. "Where did your father serve Afghanistan?" 3rd Special Forces Group, Hazel said quietly. He was Sergeant Owen Cooper. Michael's heart stopped. He knew that name. He had served under Owen Cooper. The man had saved his life. Twice. And now, his daughters were facing death for protecting someone, maybe even for protecting the truth. They reached the edge of Austin near a wooded ridge off a forgotten county road. Michael pulled the van into a gravel path and parked. "This is it," Harper said. "We bury it under the old pine." As the three of them stepped into the rain, Michael wasn't just escorting prisoners anymore. He was following ghosts of loyalty, of unfinished battles, of debts yet unpaid. And with each step through the wet underbrush, he felt it. This was no longer about law. It was about justice. The storm had arrived with a vengeance. Rain pelted the van's windshield like 1,000 tiny fists, and thunder cracked overhead with the fury of cannon fire. The tires struggled for grip along the muddy gravel road, each bump jarring the breath from the cabin. Michael's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel as he followed Harper's soft directions toward the clearing. Hazel sat behind him, silent but alert, her eyes scanning the tree line like a soldier trained in instinct rather than drills. This wasn't a joyride. This was a mission. They reached a narrow trailhead long forgotten by most of Travis County. The trees parted enough to reveal a sloping patch of earth, crowned by a single ancient pine tree, its bark split roots, gnarled like a sentinel holding a secret. "This is it," Harper whispered. Michael killed the engine. The three sat there for a moment, listening to the rain drumming on the roof. No words, just breathing. Then, without hesitation, Harper opened the van's side door and stepped out into the downpour. Hazel followed, pulling her prison-issued boots up from the mud with effort. Michael retrieved a small, collapsible shovel from the back and joined them. Under the pine tree, Harper knelt, her fingers trembling as she pressed the rusted key into the wet ground. Hazel pulled away some of the old rocks that had been arranged to look like a child's memorial. It wasn't long before the shovel struck something solid. Michael crouched and helped clear the last layer of soil. There it was. A dented military ammo box, sealed shut with duct tape and grit, its surface etched with the faint outline of a Delta Force patch, faded but unmistakable. Michael swallowed hard. His heartbeat was deafening in his ears. Harper lifted the box with reverence, cradling it like a relic. She passed it to Michael without a word. He carried it back to the van and placed it on the center console, wiping the lid with the sleeve of his green jacket. He used the rusted key to pry open the latch. Inside were 3 items: a dog tag stained with time, Cooper Owen, SGT 3rd, SFG, a folded letter sealed in wax, and an external hard drive wrapped in a Ziploc bag marked, "For the girl." If it gets that far. Hazel gasped. I never knew he left this. Michael opened the letter with careful fingers. It was handwritten, slightly smudged, but readable. To whomever finds this, and if it's you, Harper or Hazel, then I'm sorry. If I'm gone, it means I didn't get to finish what I started. Vincent Hale is not who he says he is. He's got the cops in his pocket and the judge too. I've got a recording of him admitting what he did to your mother. And to me. It's on the drive. That's the only leverage I've got. If I disappear or something happens to me, get this to someone who still believes in the truth. Not everyone in the system is rotten. Some still wear the uniform inside their hearts. Find one of them. I love you both. Don't let them bury you in lies like they did me. Dad Michael didn't speak. He simply stared at the letter. The rain continued to fall in sheets, obscuring the outside world, isolating them in this raw, broken truth. This changes everything, he murmured. Harper's voice cracked. No one ever believed us. Not even our own lawyer. We confessed to save our mom from testifying. We thought the plea would end it. We didn't know Dad had this. Michael's throat tightened. You shouldn't have had to carry that choice. Not at your age. Not ever. Hazel took the hard drive gently, as if it were sacred. Do you think this is enough? Michael looked at them. It has to be. He closed the ammo box, wrapped it in an old prison blanket he kept in the back seat, and placed it under the floor compartment. Now, he said, gripping the wheel again, we go back. The rain hadn't let up as they approached the edge of prison grounds. The storm had knocked out multiple systems across the county, including portions of the correctional facility's grid. Emergency lighting flickered through the windows. Michael parked the van beside the rear loading dock, where shadows clung to the corners, and visibility was poor. Timing was everything now. He led the twins through the side entrance and back toward their block, using a series of maintenance corridors he knew like the back of his hand. Years of quiet observation had taught him the rhythm of the guards' movements, the timing of camera rotations, and how to walk without being seen. Inside D Block, it was darker than usual. The emergency power barely lit the halls. He paused outside cell D14. If you want to run, this is your last chance, he whispered. Harper didn't flinch. No. We came back, just like we said. Hazel gave a faint smile. Besides, we've got something bigger now, the truth. Michael opened the cell door. They stepped inside. He relocked it and exhaled. Then he pressed a small flash drive, a backup copy of the hard drive, into his pocket. He would need help. Legal help. Credible, public, and fast. Back in his office, soaked and shaking, Michael plugged the drive into a secure offline laptop. The files opened without password, just folders labeled by date. Video files, audio logs. He clicked on the first one. A grainy clip played Owen Cooper bruised and bloodied, pointing a hidden camera at someone just off screen. And then, the voice. Vincent Hale. I told you stay quiet, and I won't have to make it look like you OD'd in your garage, soldier boy. Michael froze. The video jumped, and Owen's voice cracked through the static. You touch my girls, and I'll burn it all down. Michael closed the laptop and stared into the storm. He had seen war. He had taken lives to save others. He had stared down the worst of humanity across oceans. But this was evil at home, and it was wrapped in a badge. As dawn began to break through the thick curtain of rain, the prison hummed with the sound of backup generators struggling to stay alive. Michael walked back through the empty hallway toward the administrative wing. His boots squelched with water, his jacket damp but heavy with purpose. He wasn't the same man who had sipped coffee alone yesterday morning. Now he was carrying proof, and this time, he wouldn't just write appeals or escort inmates. This time, he would fight. Because justice wasn't a luxury, it was a duty. And Michael Reed, quiet, broken, widowed father, had just stepped back onto the battlefield. The wipers swept across the windshield in a steady rhythm, flinging rain aside with mechanical indifference. Michael Reed sat silently in the driver's seat of his prison transport van, his eyes locked on the road ahead as the gray dawn slowly bled into daylight. The Texas countryside stretched out on either side of the road, wild, wet, and unrelenting. In the rearview mirror, Harper and Hazel Cooper sat, cuffed, but calm, their gazes fixed forward, not speaking. It wasn't fear in their eyes. It was something deeper, something solemn. This wasn't an escape. It was a return to the past, to buried truths, to a father's unfinished fight. Michael broke the silence first. "We're going to meet someone." "Who?" Hazel asked. "An old contact," Michael replied. "Someone who doesn't trust the system anymore, but still works within it." Harper raised an eyebrow. "So, like you?" Michael didn't answer. He didn't need to. They pulled into a gas station just outside of Austin, hidden between a shuttered mechanic's garage and a field of rusted trucks. Michael parked near the back, next to a silver SUV with tinted windows. A woman stepped out, shielding her face from the wind. She wore jeans boots and a black raincoat. Her auburn hair was pulled back tight, and the badge clipped to her belt identified her as Claire Donovan, public defender. She approached, slowly studying Michael with a narrowed gaze. "I got your message," she said flatly. "And I almost didn't come." "I'm glad you did," Michael said. Claire looked past him toward the back of the van. Her face darkened when she saw the twins. "You're driving around condemned inmates, without authorization, in a storm." Michael handed her a flash drive. "Watch what's on this first, then lecture me." Claire hesitated, then inserted the drive into her laptop. Her eyes scanned the screen as she clicked on the video files. A minute passed, then 2. The rain battered the van's roof like impatient drums. Finally, Claire's face paled. Her lips parted. "Is this real?" Michael nodded. Owen Cooper was their father. Delta Force. He left them this before he died. It's not just about the girls. It's about a corrupt system and a man who covered up everything. Claire exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the laptop screen. Vincent Hale. I remember him from the original case. Deputy Marshal back then. Now he's sitting on the Austin PD Oversight Committee, which means Michael said we don't go through channels. We go above them. Claire turned to the twins. "Did you know this evidence existed?" "We suspected," Harper said. "But our father never told us outright. We thought taking the fall would protect our mother. She was dying. We didn't want her dragged through the courts." "You confessed to murder," Claire whispered. "To protect someone else. And no one stopped you." "No one believed us," Hazel said bitterly. "You didn't believe us either." Claire flinched, guilt flashing across her face. "I was fresh out of law school. They gave me your case on a Monday. You were sentenced by Friday." "I didn't know." "What?" "I didn't know." Michael placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You do now." Claire looked at him, the weight of the moment sinking in. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to file an emergency stay of execution with the Western District Court," Michael said. "Today. and I want you to request a full evidentiary hearing." Claire stared at him. "That'll take weeks, maybe months." Michael leaned in. "You have the recording. You have the confession. You have the chain of custody thanks to me retrieving it from the girls. Make it happen." She paused, then slowly nodded. "Okay, I'll try. But we'll need a judge willing to listen." Michael's jaw tightened. "I know one." That evening, with Claire driving ahead in the SUV and the van following behind, they reached a quiet residential neighborhood in the western hills of Austin. The house was modest, brick 2 stories, and wrapped in ivy. Michael stepped out into the drizzle and rang the bell. Moments later, the door opened. Standing there was a man in his 60s, wearing a flannel shirt and old military boots. He had the sharp eyes of someone who'd seen too much and spoken too little. "Judge Samuel Brooks, Michael Reed," he said, not smiling. "Last I checked, you weren't authorized to make house calls." "Last I checked," Michael replied. "You were still a man who believed in justice." Judge Brooks stepped aside without a word. Inside, Claire laid out the contents of the hard drive. Judge Brooks listened without interruption as the audio played Vincent Hale's threats, Owen Cooper's desperate warnings. When the final clip ended, Brooks folded his hands. "If what I've just heard is accurate and admissible, you've got more than enough to file a stay." Claire nodded. "I'll prepare it now. I just need your signature." Brooks hesitated. "It's highly irregular. No chain of command. No official court date. And Michael, what you've done could land you in prison." Michael looked him dead in the eye. "Then I'll serve time. But not before I make sure these girls don't die for a crime they didn't commit." The judge stared at him, a long beat of silence passing between 2 men who had once served together overseas. Then Brooks picked up the pen. "You're still a pain in my ass, Reed," he signed the order. Outside, as Claire made calls and prepared to deliver the stay of execution, Michael sat on the porch with the twins. The storm had passed. The sky was clearing, stars beginning to break through the clouds. "You didn't have to come back," he said. "You could have run. You could have disappeared." "We didn't want to disappear," Hazel said quietly. "We wanted the truth to live." Harper looked at the horizon, her voice soft. "Our dad died trying to protect us. This was the only way to finish what he started." Michael stared at the stars, a familiar ache settling in his chest. He thought of his own daughter Grace, sleeping peacefully back home, unaware that her father was once again walking a tightrope between duty and destruction. But this time, it wasn't for a nation. It was for justice, for 2 daughters who had lost everything, and for a man who'd left behind one last chance to make things right. Back at Travis County Correctional Facility, silence had taken on a different texture. It was no longer the dull hum of routine. It was the razor-edged stillness that came before the first domino falls. Michael Reed walked the corridor like a man returning from battle. He had escorted inmates, filled out reports, swept corridors, but never had he carried what he carried now. Evidence that could dismantle a verdict and implicate a decorated law enforcement officer in a decades-long cover-up. He nodded briefly to Officer Daniels at the security checkpoint. "Just forgot something in my office." Daniels gave a casual shrug. "Storm's playing hell with the system. Half the cameras still down. Warden's breathing fire." Michael didn't answer. His pace was even, but his mind raced. Every second counted. He reached his office and locked the door behind him. The lights flickered once. On his desk sat the old laptop. No Wi-Fi, no connection to the prison's network. Just a quiet machine that had held the secrets of the Cooper twins' past. He plugged in the drive again, opened the files. This time, he didn't focus on the video. He opened a folder titled Case 07HC Audio. Inside were 2 compressed files labeled with courthouse docket numbers. His eyes narrowed. One was titled Transcript affidavit.pdf. The other, Custody chain redacted.txt. He opened the transcript first. The date matched the night of the arrest. The transcript recorded a supposed statement from Harper, one she had allegedly given voluntarily to Deputy Marshal Vincent Hale. But the wording didn't match her style of speech. The syntax was cleaner, almost rehearsed. And one detail stood out. She'd supposedly said her father had a violent past with her mother. That wasn't just false. It directly contradicted the video confession from Hale himself. Michael's hand tightened into a fist. He opened the second file. Custody chain redacted.txt. It showed the movement of key evidence items: a charred wrench with suspected blood, a fuel canister from the Cooper garage, and most critically, a VHS tape marked Interview Hale, Cooper. But in the log, that last item had a handwritten note. Item discarded. Chain broken. Not entered into evidence. Michael sat back in his chair. That tape, potentially the only copy of the initial interview, had been discarded. Why, by whose order? He took out his notepad, jotted down names, dates, file paths. Then, before closing the drive, he did one last thing. He made 2 additional encrypted copies of the folder, one on another flash drive, and one hidden under a dummy folder inside the prison's legal printer queue, a spot he knew would be untouched for weeks. Just in case. By late afternoon, Claire Donovan called. Her voice was sharp, urgent. The emergency stay has been officially filed. We've got a temporary block on the execution pending review. But we're not in the clear. What's the catch? Michael asked. The judge wants more than a tape and a letter from a dead man. He wants corroborating evidence from the case file itself. That means court transcripts, witness lists, original forensics, the kind only the court or law enforcement would have had access to. Michael already knew what she would say next. I need you to get me the original plea agreement and the case notes from 2016. They're not in the public record, which means either they were sealed or buried. Michael's jaw tightened. Travis County Courthouse Archives. Exactly. You have more pull there than I do. I've already reached out to a clerk I know, but they won't act without internal clearance. You're still on the employee roster. Michael stood, grabbed his coat. Text me the document numbers. I'll get them tonight. At the Travis County Courthouse, the night crew was sparse. A single security guard recognized Michael and waved him through with barely a glance. He moved through the archival level, like a man who belonged, because for years he had. His role at the prison often included filing last-minute motions or processing handwritten appeals for inmates. The clerks had learned to trust him. He reached the locked archive room and swiped his clearance badge. The door clicked open. Rows and rows of file cabinets loomed in the dim light. He found the cabinet marked HC 2016, then the drawer labeled Cooper V. State. Nothing. He searched again. Another drawer. Still nothing. Then he noticed something odd. A mislabeled drawer 2 rows over marked simply MISC expunged cases. Inside, between unrelated civil suits, was a single slim manila envelope. No case number. No stamps. Just the faded scrawl of a name, Cooper, Harper, and Hazel. Michael opened it. Inside were 4 pages. 1. A signed plea agreement typed, but lacking a defense counsel's counter-signature. 2. A note from Hale requesting the case be handled swiftly to avoid re-traumatizing witnesses. 3. A statement signed by Judge Rowley, who had died 2 years ago, claiming the confessions were clear, voluntary, and without coercion. 4. And most damning, an official request to destroy the original interview tape. Michael's blood ran cold. This wasn't negligence. It was orchestration, a coordinated effort to erase any trace of doubt. As he left the courthouse, a dark sedan rolled slowly into the parking lot. The driver's window lowered, revealing the hard-lined face of Vincent Hale. "You've been busy," Hale said, his voice flat. Michael didn't flinch. "What do you want?" Hale stared at him. "You think playing hero suits you?" You're putting your career and your daughter on the line for a couple of biker girls who made their bed 7 years ago." Michael's eyes narrowed. "I saw the tape, Hale. I saw what you said to their father." For a split second, something flickered in Hale's expression. Not fear, contempt. He leaned closer. "There's no tape admissible in court. No original evidence. No credible witnesses. You're chasing ghosts." Michael stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "You should pray that all I'm chasing is the truth, because if I find proof you threatened those girls or framed their father, I'll make sure the entire world knows." Hale's smile didn't reach his eyes. "People like you don't win, Reed. You follow rules, wear your honor like a badge. But you've already crossed the line." Michael's jaw clenched. "Then I'll cross it again." Hale drove off, tires hissing in the wet parking lot. Michael stood alone in the rain, the manila envelope pressed to his chest. He wasn't just holding documents, he was holding fire. And someone finally was about to get burned. The rain had stopped, but the storm was far from over. Inside his modest apartment on the outskirts of Austin, Michael Reed stood by the window, watching the first sunlight break through a wall of gray clouds. It was barely 7 a.m., but he had already printed out every critical document, copies of the transcript plea deal chain of custody logs, and the damning court order to destroy the interview tape. Each sheet felt like a match waiting to be struck. He zipped the documents into a weatherproof bag and slid it into his satchel. Across the small room, Grace sat at the kitchen table, half asleep, her cereal untouched. "You're not going to work today, are you?" she asked. Michael walked over and kissed the top of her head. "No, honey. Today's different." She looked up, brows furrowed. "Is it about those girls?" He nodded. Grace hesitated. "Will you get in trouble?" Michael paused, then knelt beside her. Doing the right thing always comes with risk, but if no one takes that risk, nothing ever changes. Her voice was barely a whisper. "But what if you lose me because of it?" Michael's throat tightened. "Then I didn't deserve you in the first place." Grace threw her arms around his neck, holding tight. He closed his eyes. For one perfect second, the world outside didn't exist. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Claire. "The federal clerk's office closes at 12 noon today due to maintenance. If we don't file by then, the execution window opens at midnight." Michael stood. "I have to go." By 8:15 a.m., Michael was weaving through Austin traffic like a man driving against time itself. Claire was waiting for him at the courthouse steps, her arms crossed tightly against the wind. "You look like you haven't slept," she said. "I haven't," he replied, handing her the documents. "Everything you need is in there." "The real question is, will it be enough?" Claire opened the file, flipping through the pages like a surgeon prepping for triage. "The transcript doesn't match Harper's linguistic pattern. The plea agreement lacks legal countersignature. And the original custody record shows clear manipulation of evidence. Plus, Michael added a personal recording of Hale threatening Owen Cooper." Claire looked up, her expression unreadable. "If we win this stay, they'll come for both of us." "Hard." Michael shrugged. "They already are." They passed through security and stepped into the marble-floored lobby of the Western District Federal Courthouse. Inside, the air buzzed with low conversation and the distant echo of heels against tile. Claire led the way to the clerk's office, where a young woman with wide eyes glanced up from her computer. "Ma'am, we're closing at noon. Can I help you?" Claire placed the file on the desk. "I'm filing a motion for permanent stay of execution and emergency evidentiary hearing under Title 28 U.S.C. Parv 225E4. Counsel Claire Donovan, bar number 41327. The clerk blinked. "And the case, Cooper v. State of Texas. 2016 conviction. Petitioners Harper and Hazel Cooper." The woman began typing, her fingers hesitant. Then her brow furrowed. "This case, it's sealed." Claire leaned forward. unseal it. We're petitioning on the grounds of prosecutorial misconduct, evidence tampering, and judicial fraud. The clerk glanced between them, unsure. I need a supervisor. Get one, Claire said flatly. Michael stepped aside as a manager approached, glanced through the paperwork, and let out a soft whistle. You're digging into a deep grave, Ms. Donovan. Claire met his gaze without blinking. Then, let's start exhuming. While Claire filed the motion, Michael stepped outside for air. He wasn't 2 steps past the doors when a black Cadillac pulled up across the street. He recognized the license plate before he saw the man behind the wheel. Vincent Hale. The window rolled down slowly. Hale wore sunglasses, but the curve of his smirk was visible. Federal courthouse. Bold move. Michael said nothing. Hale leaned out slightly. You really think a confession from a dead man and a stack of recycled documents will save those girls? This world runs on power, not pity. Michael stepped forward. And people like you abuse both. Hale's voice lowered. Walk away now, Reed. Or I'll have CPS knocking on your door so fast, your little girl won't even get to pack her teddy bear. Michael's jaw tensed. You threaten my daughter again, and you'll see what Delta does when it fights back. Hale chuckled, then pulled away. Michael stood there, heart pounding, not from fear, but from clarity. Hale was worried, and that meant they were getting close. Back inside, Claire emerged from the filing office with a sealed folder. We're on the docket, she said. Hearing scheduled for 6 p.m. Emergency session. Same judge, Claire nodded. Samuel Brooks. Michael exhaled slowly. The man who once led him through combat would now preside over the courtroom where truth would be put on trial. I need to get the girls ready, he said. Claire put a hand on his arm. And Michael, thank you. Not just for them, but for reminding me why I became a lawyer. He gave her a faint smile. We're not done yet. We're at 3:45 p.m. Michael returned to the prison under heavy scrutiny. Word of his suspension had spread. Some officers wouldn't look him in the eye. Others whispered as he passed. But Daniels, the young guard, stopped him near D Block. Sir, they know something's up. Hale was here this morning. Talked to the warden behind closed doors. You're being investigated for evidence theft and aiding in an escape. Michael nodded. Thanks for the warning. Daniels hesitated. You didn't do it, did you? I did everything the system refused to. Daniels stepped aside. Then I hope you burn them to the ground. In cell D14, Harper and Hazel stood as he approached. We heard Harper said, Court tonight, 6 p.m. You'll both testify. Brooks is presiding. Hazel let out a shaky breath. You think they'll believe us this time? Michael met their eyes. They won't believe words, but they'll believe truth. And we have it now. Harper stepped forward, pulling something from under her mattress. A photograph, worn, creased, protected in plastic. It showed a man in Delta fatigues, flanked by 2 young girls. We've carried his memory a long time, she said. Now it's his turn to carry us. Michael took the photo gently and placed it into his folder of exhibits. Let's bring your father home, he said. And as the prison van rolled out of Travis County one more time, Michael Reed didn't feel like a transport officer anymore. He felt like a soldier again, fighting not on foreign soil, but here where the war was quiet. And the stakes were life itself. The federal courthouse was bathed in golden light as the sun dipped below the Texas horizon. Its facade, all granite and steel, loomed solemnly over the street, like a monument to something far older than law, truth, or the pursuit of it. Michael Reed stood just outside the courthouse security checkpoint, watching as Harper and Hazel Cooper were escorted from the van in handcuffs. The irony wasn't lost on him. They were no longer fugitives, yet still in chains. They walked with quiet strength, their orange prison jumpsuits clean, their hair pulled back neatly. But it was their eyes that told the real story. Gone was the guarded, exhausted defiance of the first day. In its place was something sharper resolve. Claire Donovan met them at the courthouse steps with a satchel full of motions and evidence files. She was dressed in a dark navy suit, simple and crisp, her hair pulled into a low bun. As the courthouse bell rang 6 times, she looked at Michael. "He's inside. Judge Brooks." She nodded. "And the courtroom is already half full. Journalists, off-duty cops, court clerks, Hale's people too." Words spread fast. Michael's jaw clenched. "Good. Let them watch." Inside courtroom 3B, the air was thick with anticipation. Every creak of the wooden benches and shuffle of papers seemed louder than it should have been. A hush fell as the door to the judge's chambers opened. Judge Samuel Brooks stepped out wearing his robe-like armor. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his gaze swept across the room with quiet authority. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. Claire stood. "Your Honor, Claire Donovan for the petitioners. We are here under emergency motion to stay execution and request an evidentiary hearing in light of newly discovered evidence." The judge nodded. "You may proceed." Claire walked to the center of the room. "We are not here to retry the entire 2016 conviction of Harper and Hazel Cooper. We are here because new evidence has surfaced, evidence that shows manipulation of the legal process, destruction of exculpatory materials, and a confession by a now-deceased father whose warnings went ignored." She held up the signed court order to destroy the VHS tape. "This document alone demands scrutiny. But we have more." She clicked a small remote. The screen behind her came alive with the grainy footage of Owen Cooper bruised facing the camera. The sound of Vincent Hale's voice filled the courtroom. "You stay quiet, and I won't have to make it look like you OD'd in your garage." The room stilled. Claire turned off the screen and looked at the judge. "Your Honor, this isn't just new evidence. It's a new story. A truer one." Brooks nodded slowly. "Defense may call their first witness." Harper took the stand first. She sat tall, hands steady in her lap, voice unwavering as she detailed the years of abuse, the silence of the legal system, and the day she and her sister chose to plead guilty rather than let their dying mother be dragged through court. "We didn't kill him," she said softly. "But we were afraid no one would believe us. We weren't saints. We rode with a biker gang. We looked like people easy to judge. So we became exactly that judged." Hazel followed her testimony, echoing the same pain, but adding detail. She described the moment her father gave them the key, the way his hands shook, the warning in his eyes. "He told us never to use it, unless everything else failed. I think he knew what was coming. He knew Hale wouldn't stop." Claire submitted the hard drive, the transcript, inconsistencies, and the chain of custody logs. She tied each point into a timeline that painted a chilling picture of a coordinated suppression of truth. Then, just as Claire was about to rest her case, the courtroom door creaked open. Vincent Hale entered. He wore a dark suit, his badge glinting subtly on his belt. He strode down the aisle with the confidence of a man who'd faced threats and outlived them all. He didn't sit in the gallery. He went straight to the bailiff and whispered something. Moments later, Judge Brooks looked up. "Mr. Hale, do you intend to testify?" "I request the opportunity, Your Honor," Hale said, "to set the record straight." Claire leaned toward Michael, her voice low. "He's baiting us. He's got something." Michael didn't move. His eyes never left Hale. "Let him speak." On the stand, Hale began smoothly. "I knew Owen Cooper. Served alongside him for 2 years. He was a decorated soldier, but not a stable man. After he left the military, he became erratic, paranoid, violent." Claire stood. "Objection. Character assassination without foundation. Judge Brooks nodded. Sustained. Mr. Hale, stick to the facts. Hale adjusted his tie. The girls confessed. Voluntarily. The plea agreement was entered legally. I recommended sealing the tapes to protect sensitive identities, not destroy them. He looked directly at the judge. This is a campaign built on circumstantial fear and emotion. Nothing more. Claire rose for cross-examination. Mr. Hale, did you or did you not recommend destruction of physical evidence? Related to this case, I recommended it be removed from public record, not physically destroyed. Then explain this court order signed by you requesting destruction of Exhibit D14, a VHS tape labeled Interview Hale, Cooper. Hale stiffened. That order was forged. Claire walked to the evidence table, pulled out the original file folder. This signature matches 3 others, on record under your name. Are you suggesting all of them were forged? Hale hesitated. It's possible. My signature is accessible. Claire tilted her head. And how would you explain your voice on this recording? She clicked play again. The courtroom filled once more with, "You touch my girls and I'll burn it all down." Hale's jaw worked. That tape was altered. Then we'll submit it for forensic review, Claire said calmly, along with subpoenaed communication logs from your time with the U.S. Marshals. A flicker of unease crossed Hale's face. Judge Brooks leaned forward. Mr. Hale, I suggest you consult an attorney. This court will now recess for 1 hour while I review the motion in chambers. The gavel struck. Outside the courtroom, Michael stood in the hallway watching the doors. He felt it in his bones, the shift. Hale's confidence had cracked. The facade was breaking. But then just as he exhaled, thinking they'd finally turned the tide, his phone buzzed. Internal notification. Michael Reed, suspended from Travis County Correctional Facility. Effective immediately. Subject to formal investigation. Custody rights under review. He stared at the screen. Claire stepped beside him, reading over his shoulder. They're coming after you. He nodded, jaw clenched. Starting with Grace. Claire's voice was steel. Then we finish this. Tonight. And as Michael turned toward the courtroom doors once more, he knew he had already lost a career. He might lose custody of his child, but he could not lose justice. Not now. Not after everything. The courtroom buzzed with a low, anxious energy as the doors reopened for the evening session. The smell of old wood and fresh coffee lingered in the air, signs that this was no ordinary hearing. The crowd had grown. Reporters filled the back rows. A few prison officials stood near the aisle, arms folded, eyes cold. Even off-duty law enforcement officers were scattered throughout their presence, unspoken but loud. Michael Reed walked in behind Harper and Hazel Cooper, both now dressed in navy blue formal prison attire for court appearance. They moved with quiet dignity, hands uncuffed but guarded. At the front table, Claire Donovan was already setting up files fanned out like weapons of truth. She glanced up at Michael and gave a firm nod. Judge Samuel Brooks entered from chambers a moment later. He looked even graver than usual, and for good reason. What was about to unfold was no longer a simple stay of execution hearing. It was a reckoning. The court reconvenes, the bailiff announced. Judge Brooks addressed the room. This court has reviewed the emergency motion, the supporting exhibits, and the testimony provided earlier. Before rendering a preliminary ruling, I will hear final arguments from both sides. Claire stood. Her voice, clear and unwavering, carried through the chamber. Your Honor, the issue before us is not guilt or innocence, but integrity. The integrity of the process, the chain of evidence, the oaths sworn by officers of the law. These sisters confessed to a crime under duress and incomplete information. They made that sacrifice to protect their dying mother. And yet, behind that decision lay a web of misconduct, an interview tape, destroyed a confession, manipulated a judge's signature on a plea that was never countersigned by counsel, and a father's warning recorded and ignored. She gestured to the evidence table where the dog tags and the hard drive sat like silent witnesses. What they asked for today is not a pardon. It is not freedom. It is a chance, just one, to stand before the law, not as caricatures of biker criminals, but as human beings worthy of justice. She turned to face the judge, and they asked that in a court where truth still matters. A pause. Then Judge Brooks turned. Mr. Hale, the court has granted you time for rebuttal. Proceed. Vincent Hale rose slowly from his seat. Gone was the swagger of earlier. He was precise, now measured. Your Honor, he began, I understand the gravity of what has been presented here, but I also understand how easy it is to misinterpret actions in hindsight. I served this county with distinction. I followed protocol. I protected the victims of abuse, including the mother of the defendants. Did mistakes happen in the process? Possibly. But mistakes are not malice. These girls confessed, voluntarily, and now years later, they want to rewrite history with a dead man's letter and a grainy tape that can't be authenticated. His eyes turned toward the gallery, briefly locking with Michael's. We all want to believe in redemption stories, he said. But sometimes they're just that, stories. He sat. Judge Brooks was silent for a long moment, fingertips pressed together. Then he spoke. This court recognizes the burden of proof lies not in perfection of hindsight, but in the integrity of the process. And the integrity here. He paused, looked directly at Vincent Hale. Has been compromised. The room held its breath. The destruction of evidence without proper court order, the absence of assigned legal counsel on the plea, and the emergence of a credible audio recording all point to a gross failure in procedural justice. He turned to Harper and Hazel. The court hereby grants a permanent stay of execution and orders an immediate reopening of the criminal investigation into the case of Cooper versus State. The room erupted not in cheers, but in a collective gasp. Cameras clicked. Journalists scrambled for their phones. Michael closed his eyes for just a beat, then opened them. Hazel was crying. Harper was staring straight ahead, her hands clenched, knuckles white. Judge Brooks banged the gavel. Court is adjourned. But it wasn't over. Outside, the courthouse steps were flooded with questions. Claire gave a brief statement to the press, flanked by the sisters. The system didn't give them justice when it mattered. But today, we took one step closer to correcting that failure. We trust that the state will do the right thing from here on. As the press swarmed, a uniformed officer quietly approached Michael. Mr. Reed, you're to report to Internal Affairs tomorrow morning. Formal charges are being reviewed. Michael nodded. Let them review. The officer hesitated. You should also know. Child Protective Services was contacted this evening. They've requested a temporary review of your custody rights. Michael felt the words like a blow to the chest, but he didn't flinch. He simply said, "Thank you," and walked away. At a small cafe on Congress Avenue hours later, the four of them sat together, Michael, Claire, Harper, and Hazel. The hard drive was on the table untouched. Tomorrow's going to be worse, Claire warned. The state's going to spin this. You'll be their scapegoat. I can take it, Michael said. You might lose your job, your pension. Grace Michael looked up sharply. Grace will know her father did what was right. That's worth more than a badge. Harper leaned forward. You didn't have to believe us. No one else did. Michael smiled faintly. That's not true. One person did. Your father. He believed you enough to hide the truth for years. He didn't ask for fame or vindication. He just left you the pieces. You finished the puzzle. Hazel reached into her pocket and slid something across the table. A small, worn military coin Delta Force issue. It was his, she said. We want you to have it. Michael picked it up gently, running his thumb over the insignia. Tell Grace, Hazel said, voice catching. Tell her this isn't just about second chances. It's about giving the next generation a better first one. Michael nodded, eyes shining. I will. And as the city lights glittered across the rain-slicked street outside, Michael Reed, former soldier, widowed father, prison staffer turned reluctant. Hero sat with the daughters of a brother in arms, knowing that whatever came next, they had already won. Because truth, once spoken, doesn't return to silence. The early morning air in Austin had a strange sweetness to it, like the world was trying to wash away the dust of everything that had just happened. It was the first time in years that Harper and Hazel Cooper breathed fresh air, not filtered through barbed wire and reinforced concrete. Michael Reed stood beside the courthouse steps, hands resting on his hips, watching the two sisters like a sentry. They had just been formally released into provisional freedom, pending the full reinvestigation of their case. Their charges weren't erased yet, but the execution had been stayed, and the system had at last paused to listen. The crowd outside had thinned. The media had moved on to other headlines, but the real story was still unfolding, quiet, human, and hard-earned. Claire Donovan stepped beside Michael, coffee in hand, her usually sharp eyes soft with something close to awe. You ever think it would get this far? Michael shook his head. No. But I knew we couldn't stop halfway. He turned as Harper and Hazel approached, now dressed in plain civilian clothes, donated by a women's outreach group that Claire had quietly contacted the night before. Hazel smirked. You two look like you've been through a war. Claire chuckled. We have. Yours? Harper held up a small leather pouch. Our dad's dog tags. I'm not letting them go. Not again. Michael gestured toward the curb, where a vintage Harley-Davidson stood waiting, chrome-faded seat, reupholstered, but unmistakably well-loved. He walked them over, pulled out the key. This was his. Michael said, holding out the key. You said you wanted to go back to that road outside Austin where he used to take you. Harper stared at the bike like it was a ghost given form. You kept it. I restored it. Thought maybe someday. He trailed off. Hazel reached out, touched the handlebars like they were sacred. He used to call it Thunderheart. Said it was the only thing that ever outran his fear. Michael smiled faintly. Then it's time you outran yours. They rode in silence down the winding county road. Claire followed in her car behind them just in case, but Michael insisted on riding alongside the twins, Harper in the front, Hazel gripping her sister's waist with practiced ease. As the miles rolled by, the air shifted, from heavy and tense to light. Birds called from the trees, the sunlight spilled across the hills, and for a moment, it was as if the years had peeled away, and two little girls were once again riding behind their father. They stopped on a ridge overlooking a wide pasture. Wildflowers bloomed in soft patches across the field, and a windmill turned lazily in the breeze. Michael pulled over and shut off his engine. The sudden silence was louder than the ride. Harper and Hazel got off the bike and walked a few steps into the grass. Then Harper knelt and pulled something from her jacket, the folded letter from their father. The original. He used to sit here, she said, voice barely a whisper. Said it was the only place in Texas that didn't feel like it was trying to prove something. Hazel laughed softly. He'd watch the sunset, drink a beer, and say, even the sky knows how to let go. Michael stood back, hands in his pockets, watching them. They were still haunted. Still healing, but they were standing. That was more than most ever got. Harper looked back at him. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you walk away when the board rejected our request? When Hale came after you? When you found out you'd lose your job? Michael was quiet for a moment. Then, Because one day, my daughter's going to ask me what kind of man I was. And I need to have an answer I can live with. Hazel swallowed. She's lucky. I'm the lucky one, Michael said. She gave me a reason to fight the right battles. Later that afternoon, back at the courthouse, Judge Brooks met them briefly outside chambers. The formal hearing was over, but he had requested a personal moment. He was out of his robe, dressed in a simple white shirt and slacks, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked every bit the soldier he once was. I wanted to say something before the press spins it into sound bites, he said. Harper and Hazel stood still, unsure. Brooks looked them in the eye. I failed you. Not just me, but the bench. The whole system. 7 years ago, I signed off on a plea deal I didn't look hard enough at. I trusted an officer of the law, and I didn't listen closely enough to 2 scared young women who didn't look like victims. He stepped forward, voice steady. What you did coming back, standing up, testifying, that was courage. Not just for yourselves, but for the ones who'll come after you. Harper nodded slowly. Thank you, Your Honor. That means more than you know. He offered a firm handshake, then turned to Michael. Still making trouble, Reed. Michael grinned. Just keeping the promises we made, sir. Brooks's expression softened. You know you've likely ended your career in corrections, Michael shrugged. Maybe it's time for something better. That evening, Michael returned home to find Grace waiting on the front porch. She had her backpack on, her sneakers untied, and her face lit up when she saw him. You're back, she shouted, running into his arms. He scooped her up, heart full. I told you I'd always come back. She leaned back. Did the girls get out? They did. She smiled. Were they nice? Michael hesitated, then nodded. They were brave, braver than most adults I know. Grace reached into her jacket and pulled out a small plastic container. I made cookies. You can have 2. Michael laughed. What if I want 3? You have to earn the 3rd one. He kissed her forehead. Then I'll keep trying. That night, as the stars rose above Texas, Michael sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the Delta Force Challenge coin the sisters had given him, resting on the table beside him. Inside, Grace was asleep. Across town, the Cooper sisters were spending their first night outside prison walls. And somewhere, a man named Owen Cooper, father soldier truth-teller, was finally at peace. Because justice didn't always come in gavel strikes or headlines. Sometimes it came in the form of a second ride, a healing ride, one that led not away from the past, but through it, and toward something brighter. 1 year later, the old church on East 11th Street had been converted into a community center. Sunlight spilled through the stained glass windows, not onto pews, but onto folding chairs and whiteboards. Where hymns had once echoed, now the air was filled with a different kind of hope. A modest wooden sign hung above the entrance. Second Ride Foundation Justice has no expiration date. Inside, the hum of quiet energy pulsed through the room. Volunteers sorted files, printed brochures, and organized care packages. Women of all ages, some just released from incarceration, some still fighting legal battles, moved through the halls with tentative optimism. At the far end of the main hall, a table had been set with a podium and chairs for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The crowd gathered judges, public defenders, former inmates, even a few reporters. Michael Reed stood in the back, arms folded over his chest. He wore a dark green collared shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, his hair a little longer, now flecks of gray beginning to show near his temples. Beside him stood Grace, now 11, a little taller, her posture more confident. She wore a t-shirt that read, "Learn the law, break the cycle," the motto of a youth program launched by the foundation just 3 months earlier. Michael scanned the room and caught sight of them, Harper and Hazel Cooper. They stood at the podium in tailored suits, simple, unpretentious, but sharp. No trace of the prison jumpsuits, No hint of the media frenzy that once surrounded their names. Just two women who had survived the system and returned to reshape it. Hazel caught Michael's eye and nodded. Harper smiled softly. Then Harper stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you for being here today," she began. "Some of you know our story. Some of you only know pieces. But today isn't about where we've been. It's about where we go from here." She looked around the room. When we walked out of Travis Correctional 1 year ago, we didn't know what we'd become. We were two names in a file, two faces on a headline, two ghosts, really. But we also carried something our father left us, his truth. And that truth didn't just save our lives. It lit a path. Hazel took over, her voice steady. The Second Ride Foundation isn't just a name. It's a promise. A promise that no one should be defined by their worst moment or their worst mistake. And no one should be buried by a system too busy to look twice. A quiet murmur of assent rolled through the crowd. Harper returned to the mic. "This foundation provides legal aid, transitional housing job placement, and most importantly, counseling and mentorship from people who've lived it. People like us." She gestured to the back. "People like Michael Reed." All eyes turned. Michael froze for a moment, then stepped forward. Harper continued, her voice thick with emotion. Michael broke the rules, but never his honor. He risked everything to give two strangers a second chance. He believed in us before the court did, before we even believed in ourselves. Applause erupted. Michael stepped up to the podium not to speak, but to simply stand beside them. The moment said more than any words could. After the ceremony, Grace wandered over to the refreshment table, where a group of teens were gathered for the Learn the Law orientation. She wore a laminated badge that read, "Student Volunteer, Peer Mentor." Hazel approached her. "Hey, superstar. You ready to teach your first class next month?" Grace grinned. "Kind of. I'm better at asking questions than giving answers." Hazel knelt, slightly smiling. "That's what makes you good at this. Asking questions is how the truth starts." Nearby, Harper handed Michael a thick folder. "What's this?" he asked. She smirked. "Your new job." He opened it. Inside were documents, volunteer guidelines, ethics board responsibilities, and a letter with the official title, Ethics Advisor. Second Ride Foundation. Michael raised an eyebrow. "You sure I'm qualified? You've already passed the only test that matters," Harper said. "You stood between injustice and the people it tried to crush." Michael nodded slowly. "I'll do it." She softened. "You already are." Later that afternoon, after the crowd had thinned and the press had gone home, Michael found himself alone in a quiet office on the second floor of the foundation building. The walls were still mostly bare, except for a framed photo of Owen Cooper in uniform standing beside his Harley, two little girls at his sides. Michael walked over, touched the glass gently. "You did good, brother," he murmured. Then he sat at the desk, opened his laptop, and began reviewing intake forms for a woman named Maria, newly released after 15 years, with no family and nowhere to go. There was no fanfare, no spotlight, just the work. That evening, Michael and Grace returned home, tired but peaceful. As they sat on the porch, sipping cocoa and watching the sun set behind the oaks, Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "Daddy, yeah, honey. Do you ever miss your old job?" Michael thought for a moment. "I miss parts of it, the structure, the mission. But I don't miss watching people fall through the cracks and not being able to do a thing." Grace nodded. "You do things now?" He smiled. "Yeah, I guess I do." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "You gave them a second ride, right?" He turned to her, heart full. "We gave it to each other." From a distance, the house looked ordinary. A porch light glowed softly. Wind rustled the trees. but inside lived the echoes of justice restored, of daughters saved, of fathers remembered, and of one man, quiet, steadfast, who chose the harder path not because it was noble, but because it was right. Michael Reed had traded a badge for a truth, a uniform for a purpose, and in doing so had helped build something better than justice redemption. It was late autumn in Travis County. The trees along the two-lane country road had begun to turn patches of amber and burnt orange, painting the Texas horizon in soft, fading fire. The wind carried the scent of cedar and dry soil, and above the hills, the sky was impossibly wide. Michael Reed stood on his porch, a steaming cup of black coffee in his hand, and a worn denim jacket draped over his shoulders. His daughter Grace was inside, humming to herself as she packed her school bag, her voice rising and falling like a quiet song. Life had settled into a rhythm again, not the rigid schedule of a prison worker, nor the chaotic pace of courtrooms and crises, but something quieter, truer. The Second Ride Foundation was thriving. In the past 6 months, they had helped 18 women transition back into society. 6 had found employment. 3 had reunited with their children. 1 had enrolled in law school. Michael, now serving as the foundation's ethics advisor, had spent his days reviewing case notes, mentoring staff, and giving lectures at community centers about the moral obligation of those who wore a badge, or once had. But this morning was different. Because this morning, a letter had arrived. It was hand-delivered by a quiet federal courier in a tanned suit. No envelope, just a stamped folder bearing the seal of the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Texas. Michael sat at the dining table, unfolded the folder, and read. In recognition of actions taken in extraordinary moral conscience and under the full burden of professional and personal risk, the United States Judiciary formally commends Mr. Michael Reed for his unflinching dedication to justice in the matter of Cooper versus State. Though not acting under judicial authority, Mr. Reed's decisions led directly to the discovery of suppressed evidence, the exposure of systemic misconduct, and the reversal of a wrongful execution sentence. We further acknowledge his refusal to prioritize policy over principle and his conduct as exemplary of the highest tradition of ethical service. Signed, Honor Samuel Brooks, Senior Judge, U.S. District Court. At the bottom, handwritten in blue ink. You were always a soldier of the right war, Michael. S.B. Michael let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His hand trembled slightly as he folded the document and placed it beside the photo of Grace and her mother that always stayed on the mantel. Not long after Grace wandered into the room, backpack slung over one shoulder. She spotted the letter and tilted her head. Did you win an award or something? Michael smiled. Something like that. She leaned closer. What's it say? He hesitated, then handed it to her. Grace read it slowly, lips moving with each word. When she finished, she looked up at him, eyes wide. So, does this mean the people in charge finally said you were right? Michael chuckled, ruffling her hair. It means they finally caught up. That weekend, Harper and Hazel invited him and Grace to join them at a small remembrance event for Owen Cooper. The setting was humble, a shaded park in the hill country, with a view of the horizon Owen had once loved. A weathered bench had been installed beneath a lone mesquite tree with a plaque that read, Sergeant Owen Cooper, Father. Soldier. Witness. Truth buried once will always rise again. A small crowd had gathered, members of the Second Ride Foundation, a few former inmates, some quiet faces from Owen's old unit, who had traveled down from as far as Fort Bragg. Harper stepped forward and spoke first. We lost our father to silence, but he died, knowing we might one day find the voice he left behind. And we did. Not alone, but together. Hazel added, he didn't ask for revenge. He asked for justice. That was all. And now his name isn't written on a prison file. It's written in freedom. Michael stepped up quietly, a folded piece of paper in his hands. I didn't know Owen the way his daughters did, he began. But I knew him well enough to know he believed in something bigger than uniform or rank. He believed in people, in second chances. He unfolded the paper. It was weathered, faintly stained, but still legible. To whoever finds this, and if it's you, Harper or Hazel, I'm sorry. If I'm gone, it means I didn't finish what I started. But maybe you will. Maybe someone good will help you. Someone who still wears the uniform inside where it counts. Don't give up. Not on each other. Not on the truth. Dad, he looked up. That letter saved their lives. And maybe it saved mine too. There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering. Back in Austin on a crisp Sunday evening, Michael sat on his porch, with Grace curled beside him, head on his shoulder. They watched as Harper and Hazel rode up the driveway on the vintage Harley Thunderheart, its engine purring like a heartbeat that refused to fade. They stopped at the curb. Hazel lifted her visor and grinned. We thought Grace might want a ride. Grace shot upright. Can I? Michael hesitated. Hazel noticed and softened her smile. We've got helmets. We'll stay close. Just to ride around the block. Michael looked at his daughter's eyes wide, eager, bright. Then he nodded. Okay, but I want a picture first. Grace scrambled into the sidecar, while Harper handed Michael a small Polaroid camera. He raised it, framed the image Grace in the sidecar helmet askew, grinning from ear to ear. Harper and Hazel, flanking her biker jackets over jeans, sunlight bouncing off chrome. He clicked the shutter. The moment captured forever. That night, after Grace had gone to bed, Michael opened a drawer in his study and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. On the first page was a title written in blocky, careful script, Letters Never Sent. It was something he'd started writing during the darkest part of the fight, letters to his late wife, to Grace, to himself. Tonight, for the first time in months, he picked up a pen and began a new entry. Dear Grace, today you rode in the same sidecar where two little girls once rode behind their father, not knowing that one day they'd become the reason others got to ride free too. You'll grow up in a world I hope is kinder, wiser, one where truth mattered not just in courts, but in homes and hearts. When people ask who your father was, I hope you smile and say he wasn't perfect, but he showed up when it mattered. And I hope you always remember, justice isn't an idea. It's a choice, one we make every day. Love, Dad. He closed the notebook, leaned back, and let out a slow breath. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. The stars blinked quietly above the Texas sky. And in that moment, Michael Reed finally allowed himself something rare. Peace. Because some battles weren't fought with guns. They were fought with courage, compassion, and the unwavering belief that the truth still matters. And sometimes the last letter is the one that sets everything right. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one, and your stories inspire us more than you know. If this story moved you or reminded you of someone who stood up for what's right, please consider subscribing to Soul Moment Story. Here we share quiet stories that carry big heart stories of redemption, healing, and hope for a better world. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and remember, the smallest act of good can change someone's whole story.